I am Lisa Bennett, 34 years old, and the chief accountant at a financial firm in Manhattan. For the past 6 years, I've poured every ounce of energy into keeping my family from falling apart. The brownstone in Brooklyn where I grew up still stands, thanks to me covering the mortgage every month, buying groceries, fixing leaking pipes, and even replacing the roof after a storm that nearly tore the neighborhood apart. I've been the one who quietly holds the pieces together while the world seems to move on without noticing. Meanwhile, my younger brother, Ethan, 29, drifts through life like a free-spirited artist in Williamsburg, painting and sketching while waiting for everything to be handed to him. My parents, Margaret and David, always treat him as the child who needs protecting, showering him with indulgence and praise. Me? I am just the problem solver, the invisible scaffolding holding up the house and, by extension, the family. Their gratitude is subtle at best, often unspoken, as if my sacrifices are merely expected. Yet I keep going, driven by some stubborn sense of duty, wondering sometimes if anyone even notices the toll it takes. If you're still listening, we want to sincerely thank you for spending your time with us. Truly means a lot. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and let's see how far this message has reached. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories, they're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. Everything changed one September afternoon, the kind of day when the sunlight filters through the Brooklyn brownstone windows just so, casting long, golden shadows across the familiar furniture. I was at my parents' house, as usual, surrounded by stacks of financial documents, invoices, and receipts that I had spent the morning meticulously organizing on the dining table. It had become a ritual over the years, one of those invisible labors that no one really thanked me for, balancing budgets, making sense of statements, calculating what needed to be paid, and ensuring nothing spiraled into chaos. The house smelled faintly of my mother's lavender soap, mingled with the lingering scent of the storm-damaged roof that I had insisted on replacing last year. Everything seemed normal until my eyes landed on a folder tucked away at the back of the cabinet, a folder I had never noticed before. The folder was labeled in neat, familiar handwriting, "Will and Estate Plans." My pulse quickened, a mix of curiosity and trepidation surging through me. After all these years, after all the late nights and weekends I had sacrificed, didn't I deserve to know? My fingers trembled slightly as I lifted the flap, expecting perhaps some ordinary legal formalities, maybe a mundane outline of property distribution. But as I scanned the lines, my heart sank in a way that made the air seem impossibly heavy. Every asset, the Brooklyn brownstone I had kept afloat, the family's savings accounts, even my father's prized collection of vintage watches, was bequeathed entirely to Ethan. My name appeared nowhere except for a single perfunctory line: "We love both our children." A line so hollow it might as well have been written on a blank page. I froze, staring at the words as if they had physically struck me. The sacrifices, the unpaid hours, the relentless worry, the money I had poured into keeping the family afloat, they meant nothing. In their eyes, I was invisible, a shadow in the background, while Ethan remained the favored child, the one to inherit not just the house but their pride, their legacy, their love. I sank into the kitchen chair, trying to steady my breath. A storm of emotions roared inside me: anger, disbelief, hurt, but above all, an icy sense of betrayal. I had carried this family for 6 years, and yet here it was, spelled out in black ink. I was worth nothing in the ledger of their affection. I took a deep breath and carefully placed the folder on the table. I had to confront them, had to hear the words from their own mouths, though I wasn't sure I wanted to. "Dad," I said, my voice steady despite the quiver in my chest, holding up the will. "Can we talk?" David Bennett looked up from his newspaper, his face immediately tightening. I could see it in his eyes, the brief flicker of discomfort he could never fully conceal. "Lisa, it's complicated," he said, his hands twisting the paper as if it could hide the truth. "Complicated?" I echoed, my tone calm but sharp. "I've spent years keeping this family afloat. How is that complicated?" Before he could answer, Margaret stepped in, her usual soft, soothing presence attempting to smooth the tension. "Lisa, you have your career. You're doing well for yourself. Ethan, he needs more help. That's all." I felt the words like a slap to the face. Condescension, the careful avoidance, the ease with which they dismissed everything I had done, it was suffocating. I sank my hands into my lap and stayed silent, letting the weight of their indifference press against me. Then, almost instinctively, my eyes wandered back to the folder. There, nestled between the papers, was an envelope, worn slightly at the edges, with Ethan's name in my mother's delicate handwriting. My fingers shook as I tore it open. "Ethan, you are the pride of my heart. This house will be yours to keep the family legacy alive." Nothing about me. Not a single word acknowledging the nights I had stayed up, balancing the books, the countless trips to Home Depot for repairs, the hours spent on the phone negotiating with contractors, banks, and insurance agents. I had kept them afloat, and yet their gratitude, their recognition, their inheritance, it was reserved for my brother. Anger flared, sharp and hot, but I forced myself to take a breath. I wasn't going to collapse in front of them. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg for what I had already earned through effort and devotion. I placed the will back on the table, my hands steady now, a cold determination settling in my chest. "I understand," I said quietly, almost to myself. Then, looking up at them, my voice firm and controlled, "I will not interfere with your plans anymore." Margaret's lips pressed together, her usual composure faltering. David's eyes avoided mine, flicking between me and the papers, searching perhaps for a hint of compliance, a sign that I would beg. But I gave none. I stood up, gathering my coat and bag, the folder still resting untouched on the table. I left the house without looking back, each step down the familiar Brooklyn street feeling heavier than usual. The summer air was still warm, but the sunlight that filtered through the leaves seemed sharper, almost accusing. I could feel the invisible chains of duty and expectation snapping with each step, the years of silent labor, of overlooked sacrifices, of love that had gone unrecognized, finally breaking free. By the time I reached my car, I had made a decision. I would stop funding their bills, stop managing their property, stop playing the role of the invisible savior. I would no longer be the scaffolding keeping the family from collapsing. For the first time in years, I allowed myself a moment to feel my own anger, my own grief, and faintly the beginning of liberation. Driving away from the brownstone, the streets of Brooklyn stretching endlessly ahead, I realized that nothing about this family would ever change unless I changed my relationship with them first. 4 years, I had measured my worth by their approval, but now that ledger had been ripped from my hands. The house, the money, the heritage, they had chosen my brother, and I could no longer argue with that. My worth would not be defined by what I was given, but by what I chose to claim for myself. The city skyline came into view as I drove toward Manhattan, the familiar towers reflecting the late afternoon sun. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the possibility of a life unbound, not by duty, not by expectation, not by family politics. I would still be Lisa Bennett, accountant, problem solver, daughter, but no longer the invisible one, no longer the shadow carrying everyone else. I would find a new measure of worth, one that belonged solely to me. Drama at the Brooklyn family dinner. 2 weeks later, I received the invitation, or perhaps summons, to a family dinner at my parents' house. The note had been polite, almost syrupy. "We'd love for you to join us for dinner this Saturday. We hope to see you." I knew better. After the discovery of the will and the letter, I understood what this dinner really was. A staged attempt at reconciliation, a way for my parents to assert control and maybe even guilt me back into my old role. Till I showed up, dressed carefully, with my hair neatly pulled back, my composure intact. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. Ethan was there, of course, grinning like the cat who had swallowed the cream. He looked impossibly smug, as if he already knew the outcome of every unspoken conversation, as if the entire world had conspired to hand him the inheritance on a silver platter. My parents greeted me with the faintest trace of warmth, but their eyes betrayed their nervousness. I took my seat at the long dining table, my fingers brushing against the envelope containing my mother's letter. The air was heavy, thick with unsaid words and years of unacknowledged effort. The chandelier overhead threw harsh, glittering light onto the polished wood of the table, highlighting the tension in the lines of my father's face and the nervous twitch of my mother's hand. Plates were passed, wine poured, but no one spoke, as if we were all waiting for some invisible countdown to begin. Finally, I placed the envelope on the table in front of me. Slowly, deliberately, I opened it and let the contents spill into view. "This," I said, my voice calm but carrying the weight of years, "is why I stopped. You have chosen Ethan, not me." Margaret's face went pale, the delicate mask she always wore slipping for a fraction of a second. My father muttered under his breath, trying to regain control. "You misunderstand, Lisa." But Ethan didn't wait. He leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing across his lips, and said in that infuriatingly casual tone, "Jealous, Lisa? It's just money." I met his gaze steadily, refusing to falter. "Then you should start paying the mortgage yourself," I said, each word measured, deliberate. "Because the house is yours now." Silence fell. It was not the heavy, suffocating silence of avoidance, but the charged, brittle kind that crackles before a storm. No one spoke. My mother's mouth opened once, closed again. My father's hands clenched and unclenched under the table. Ethan just leaned back, satisfied with his performance. I stood up, gathering my coat and bag. Without a backward glance, I walked toward the door. My mother's voice called out, shaky, almost pleading, "Lisa," but I didn't stop. Not this time. The walk back to my car was cold, the September air sharp against my skin, but the sting of it seemed almost comforting compared to the heat of my anger inside. Every step I took was a reclaiming of space that had long been denied to me. I was not the invisible child anymore. I was not the unpaid laborer who kept the family afloat. I was Lisa Bennett, and I had boundaries. The social media battle and unexpected support. A few days later, my phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. It didn't take long to realize what had happened. My parents had begun their campaign on Facebook, painting me as the villain. Margaret's post was bitterly performative. It's heartbreaking when a child turns their back on family. Hundreds of likes and sympathetic comments followed. Ethan's post was even worse. He wrote a long, self-righteous essay calling me selfish, obsessed with money, and unable to understand family values. I read their words, my stomach twisting, my first instinct being to scroll past and ignore. I had spent years biting back, keeping the peace, maintaining composure. But this time was different. The audacity of it, the sheer falsehood, ignited something inside me I hadn't felt in years, the refusal to be silenced. Then a friend sent me a screenshot of Ethan's post, highlighting the hundreds of likes and supportive comments from my parents' friends, and suddenly the walls of silence I had built around myself seemed too small. I realized that if I did not speak, my story would be buried, and the narrative they were crafting about me would solidify in the public eye. I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, fingers hovering over the keyboard. I knew I had to respond, not in anger, but with clarity. I began to write, carefully choosing each word, each sentence. I shared the truth, the countless hours I had spent keeping the house intact, the money I had invested, the repairs I had personally overseen, the sacrifices I had made to ensure the family never fell apart. I wrote about the discovery of the will, the letter to Ethan, and the reality of being disregarded despite my devotion. Posting it was terrifying. Within minutes, notifications started pouring in. Messages of support from old friends, colleagues, and even distant relatives began appearing. "We always knew you were the backbone of your family, Lisa. Thank you for sharing your truth. So many people relate. It's time the world sees what you've been carrying all these years." The flood of validation was unexpected. It didn't erase the hurt, but it reminded me that I wasn't alone. That there were people who recognized effort, sacrifice, and fairness. That my worth wasn't determined by the biased affection of my parents or the smug entitlement of my brother. Within hours, the post had hundreds of likes, shares, and comments. People I hadn't spoken to in years reached out privately, sharing similar experiences of being invisible in their own families, offering empathy, encouragement, and solidarity. I realized that this was not just about me anymore, it was about speaking up for anyone who had ever been overshadowed, disregarded, or underestimated. Meanwhile, my parents' posts continued to appear, but the tide had shifted. For every sympathetic comment they received, my post garnered two more from strangers who had no reason to side with me other than recognizing the truth. Ethan's smug confidence began to falter under the scrutiny of hundreds of eyes that now knew the backstory. For the first time, I sensed the imbalance tilting, not because I sought revenge, but because I had dared to tell the truth. Sitting back in my chair, reading the flood of supportive messages, I felt a strange mixture of relief and empowerment. The anger from the dinner, the betrayal, the years of invisibility, all of it had transformed into something tangible. A reminder that speaking one's truth can never be silenced, even when the ones you expected to honor it most choose otherwise. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to smile, not at the downfall of others, but at the quiet realization that I had reclaimed my narrative. I was no longer merely the accountant, the caretaker, the invisible daughter. I was Lisa Bennett, visible, heard, and finally acknowledged by the world, if not by my family. I posted on Instagram, a platform I had mostly used to keep in touch with friends and extended family, a post that I had drafted and redrafted in my head countless times over the past week. I wanted it to be precise, honest, and unflinchingly direct. I wrote, "For 6 years, I paid the mortgage, bought groceries, and handled repairs for my parents. Yet there will leaves everything to my brother, who has contributed nothing. I am not anyone's wallet. I choose myself." I hit post and waited. Honestly, I didn't expect much. But within hours, the post began to spread faster than I could scroll. Notifications lit up my phone like fireworks. Comments poured in, messages arrived from friends, colleagues, and even people I hadn't spoken to in years. My phone vibrated incessantly as each ping brought another note of solidarity. Aunt Clara was the first family member to comment, her words almost like a shield against the storm I had left behind. "Lisa, you are stronger than they think. We are proud of you." It was a balm I didn't realize I needed. Then Sarah, my cousin, shared my post with a caption that made my chest tighten. "Family is respect, not favoritism." Even some distant friends of my parents, people who had known me growing up, sent private messages. "Margaret, how could you treat Lisa this way?" It was surreal. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen, not just by strangers, but by a wider circle who recognized fairness, effort, and honesty. It wasn't just validation, it was vindication. Every comment, every message felt like a tiny act of rebellion, a recognition of everything I had silently carried for my family. Standing on the balcony of my Manhattan apartment that evening, I looked down at the city lights twinkling below like a constellation of possibilities. The cool wind brushed my face, and for a moment I closed my eyes, letting the sensation of freedom wash over me. The streets stretched out endlessly, the hum of traffic and distant sirens blending into a rhythm I hadn't noticed in years. I was no longer trapped in my parents' expectations, no longer bound by a sense of duty that had cost me so much. Then my phone rang, and rang, and rang. It was my parents. Margaret, David, relentless. The text messages piled up first, each more frantic than the last. "Lisa, you can't just abandon us. The mortgage is due, Lisa. You need to help. Ethan can't handle this alone." One call turned into 3, then 4. Each time I picked up, my mother's voice rose with desperation. "Lisa, the house is about to be foreclosed." I answered calmly, almost cruelly calm. "Let Ethan handle it. It's his inheritance." There was a pause on the line, then a low mutter from my father. Margaret sputtered something incomprehensible before hanging up. I smiled faintly, leaning against the railing. Their panic, their insistence, could not touch me now. For the first time, I could see that the chains I had carried for so long were not real, they existed only because I had allowed them to. Then came Ethan. His message appeared on my phone with a ping that made me roll my eyes. "You're overreacting, Lisa. It's just money." I typed back without hesitation, my fingers flying over the keyboard with a satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. "Then pay it yourself, heir to the house." "Go ahead. That's what inheritance is for." Silence followed. Hours passed and no reply. It was as if the smirk I had imagined on his face had vanished, replaced by an uncomfortable recognition that I was no longer the submissive, silent sister. I sipped my wine, letting the city lights reflect in the glass, thinking about how strange it was that one social media post could alter so much. Not the physical world, the house was still in Brooklyn, but the emotional world I inhabited. It had shifted under my feet, giving me a new foundation. Over the next few days, the ripple effects of the post became impossible to ignore. Friends shared it, reshared it, and wrote private messages offering support, advice, even financial help if I ever needed it. The wave of solidarity was powerful. People I had never expected to hear from sent heartfelt notes. Former colleagues, old neighbors, distant relatives. "You've been invisible too long," one friend wrote. "It's about time the world saw the truth." Even outside the online world, the shift was palpable. I noticed the difference in interactions with people I met at work, at coffee shops, even on the street. There was a subtle acknowledgement in their eyes, a sense that I was no longer carrying the invisible burden of others' expectations. And that feeling, it was intoxicating. One evening, while standing on my balcony, I thought about the years of unpaid work, the nights spent worrying about bills and repairs for a family that would never acknowledge my sacrifices. I realized that the anger I had been holding on to was not just about money, it was about recognition, about fairness, about being valued. And now, with the post going viral, with messages of support flooding in, I finally felt it. Validation, unfiltered and sincere. Of course, the situation wasn't completely free of tension. My parents continued their attempts to contact me, occasionally appearing at the lobby of my building, asking the concierge to let them in, insisting that I had a moral obligation. At one time, Margaret even demanded to speak to me in person. "Lisa, you can't just walk away from family." I stood my ground, calm, collected, and unshakable. Family isn't defined by what I give or by your approval. It's about respect and fairness. Ethan's inheritance is his responsibility, not mine. No argument followed. No tears, no tantrums, no pleading. Just the stark silence of confrontation, and then they left. I closed the door behind me, leaning against it for a moment, breathing in the quiet. The city buzzed below, oblivious to the storm I had weathered, but I felt a profound sense of peace. In the weeks that followed, my social media post continued to gather momentum. Articles, shares, and comments transformed it into more than just a personal statement. It had become a conversation about family dynamics, fairness, and the often invisible labor of women within households. I received private messages from women sharing stories eerily similar to mine, stories of being overlooked, taken for granted, or expected to sacrifice endlessly. Their gratitude, their solidarity, made me feel connected to something far larger than my own struggles. And through it all, I began to realize a crucial truth. My worth had never been defined by my parents' favoritism or by the inheritance they hoarded for Ethan. My worth had always been inherent, waiting for me to acknowledge it. Standing on that balcony, looking at the endless lights of New York, I felt it clearly for the first time: freedom, empowerment, and the intoxicating possibility of choosing my own path. No more compromises. No more invisibility. No more being the shadow holding everyone else up. I was Lisa Bennett, and finally I was seen. The social media drama only intensified the tension. My Instagram post had garnered thousands of likes and shares, sparking conversations that extended far beyond my small circle. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers sent messages of support, validating years of silent effort that had gone unnoticed. But for my parents and Ethan, the post was a slap to their carefully constructed world. Their anger was palpable. My phone rang constantly. Texts from Margaret and David flooded in, pleading, demanding, guilt-tripping. Ethan's messages were dismissive yet condescending, trying to minimize everything I had done. Then came a call from my mother. Her voice trembled, each word heavy with an emotion I had long since stopped expecting. "Lisa, I'm sorry. Can we talk?" I inhaled slowly, letting the pause stretch. I wasn't ready to revisit old wounds, not yet. My focus had shifted. My energy went toward building a life that I could call my own, free from the weight of invisible labor and unappreciated sacrifice. A few days later, Aunt Clara invited me to her home in Queens for dinner. Walking into her cozy apartment, I was greeted by warm smiles and open arms. Sarah was there too, wrapping me in a hug that felt like a shield against all the hurt I had endured. "You did the right thing," Aunt Clara said, holding my hands. "They need to learn to respect you." Those words, simple as they were, carried the weight of truth, and for the first time in months, I felt the tension in my chest loosen. That winter, I rented a charming apartment in Hudson Valley for a small Christmas gathering with the extended family that truly cared. Aunt Clara, Sarah, and a few close cousins who had always supported me were there. The smell of pine and cinnamon, the warm glow of the fireplace, and the sound of laughter filled the apartment. The joy was unpretentious, real, and completely mine. Margaret and David were not invited. Neither was Ethan. This Christmas was no longer about obligation or performance. It was about connection, respect, and love. Photos from our gathering were shared online, not as a boast, but as a celebration of real bonds. The warmth of the fire, the candid smiles, the cozy apartment, it all radiated authenticity. Unsurprisingly, my mother sent a message, terse and frustrated. "Lisa, you're dividing the family." I didn't reply. I had already made my choice. They had chosen Ethan, and I had chosen myself. Standing on the balcony of my Manhattan apartment days later, overlooking the glittering cityscape, I finally allowed myself to reflect on everything that had happened. I realized I had not just survived. I had grown, evolved, and reclaimed a sense of self that had been buried under decades of unspoken expectations. The lessons were clear, and I wanted to share them with anyone who might find themselves in a similar struggle. Lesson 1. Your worth is not determined by others' favoritism. For years, I measured myself by my parents' approval, by the sacrifices they failed to acknowledge. Learning to recognize my own value independent of their praise was liberating. Taught me that self-respect can never be outsourced, not even to those who claim to love you. Lesson 2. Boundaries are essential. Walking away from financial and emotional labor that went unrecognized was not selfish, it was necessary. Setting boundaries protects your energy, your mental health, and your dignity. Boundaries are the line between being helpful and being exploited. Lesson 3. Speaking your truth has power. Posting on social media was scary, but it shifted the narrative. Sharing my experience allowed others to see the reality of my sacrifices, and it created a network of support I had never anticipated. Truth, when spoken clearly, carries the weight to transform situations. Lesson 4. Family is defined by respect, not blood alone. Through this journey, I realized that family isn't just a matter of DNA. Aunt Clara, Sarah, and the cousins who stood by me exemplified that love, loyalty, and respect are far more meaningful than obligations imposed by blood ties. Lesson 5. Self-love is a revolutionary act. Choosing myself over their favoritism, refusing to be invisible, and building my own traditions taught me that self-love is powerful. It is the foundation of all healthy relationships and the cornerstone of a life lived authentically. Christmas in Hudson Valley became more than a holiday. It was the start of a new tradition. For the first time, I felt fully seen and appreciated. I wasn't the invisible daughter anymore. I was Lisa Bennett, a woman who had reclaimed her worth, surrounded by people who truly valued her. My parents and Ethan could keep their will and their inheritance. I had something far more precious: freedom, dignity, and self-respect. New York City's streets, alive with neon lights and bustling energy, reminded me that my life was mine to live. No one could dictate my choices, my happiness, or my sense of self-worth. Family is not just about shared blood, it is about respect, love, and care. And for the first time, I had found that in the people who genuinely mattered. If you've ever felt invisible, taken for granted, or pressured to sacrifice endlessly, remember Lisa's story. Your value is not measured by what others give you, but by how you honor yourself. Set boundaries, speak your truth, and surround yourself with those who respect and support you. You deserve nothing less. If you found this story inspiring, give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories of courage, empowerment, and self-discovery. Together, we can build a community that values respect, love, and authenticity above all else.